Jennifer talked about this incident where she and her husband got into a kind of verbal confrontation in a restaurant, and then later the man was extraordinarily helpful to her mother when she fell. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, that there's a lot of demonization going around. There's a lot of demonization from the left towards the right, and a lot of demonization from the right towards the left. And that demonization does not help anybody. Most people who voted for whoever are decent people. They were, if you listen to interviews with a lot of Trump supporters, they talk about how hard it is for them to get by financially. They don't talk about hatred of immigrants or hatred of queer people or hatred of this or hatred of that. You know, that's what their motivation was. And if they do have attitudes towards different groups of people, like, for example, immigrants, it is the economic, what they think the economic result is. In fact, it's not, but what they think is not true, but that's what they've heard and that's what they believe, and that's where they're coming from. And similarly, most people who voted for Harris were not motivated by hatred. They were motivated by concern of having people respected and honored and so on and so forth. So I think the minute we start demonizing people, we lose. Because if indeed terrible things start happening, and maybe they will, and maybe they won't, I don't know. Maybe the guardrails are strong enough that they won't, maybe the guardrails are not strong enough they will. Then all the decent people will need each other. All the people who see the humanity in everybody around them will need each other. And if we cast each other off, that won't help anybody. I'm in a, could you turn the light on? I'm in an online Facebook group, and one woman said something about how thank you, you know, I have so many friends that I just can't speak to them, I can't deal with them, I have to cast them off. These are people who would do anything for me, but I can't be around them. And I responded, they would do anything for you. Why do you have to cast them off? We need each other. We need each other. So that's the first thing, is to really recognize that common humanity. If we think that we are speaking for the humanity of all humans and the Buddha nature of all beings, then we have to see the humanity and the Buddha nature of everybody, and not just cast them off because, you know, we think they're racist or sexist or whatever. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, you talked about your emotionally hard it is, because, and how your students are, so many of your students are very frightened. And a lot of people are frightened and a lot of people are catastrophizing. That doesn't help. You have to be very clear. So this morning I was in a group on the online Sangha. We had this little coffee hour with the teachers. And I was in a group of 6 or 7 other people. And one of them I knew because I've had interviews with him online, left Laos as a refugee when he was 5 years old. So he has some memory of that time. And so I asked him, what was it like? And he talked about having to, you know, run in the night and the fear and everything like that. What we don't recognize is that this is how much of the world lives much of the time. So if terrible things happen, these kinds of terrible things happen all the time. And this 5-year-old would not have made it out of there if his parents had been catastrophizing and freaking out. They made it out of there because his parents and the adults around him figured out, okay, this is what's possible, this is what we're going to do. And you can do the quote right things, and then the person next to you doesn't make it out and you do. There's a randomness. Nothing guaranteed. Zen Master Songsan always said, nobody guarantees your life, but you have to have a clear head. And everyone's saying, let the emotions come out. Yeah, let the emotions come out. Let them come out, and don't let them back. Or if you let them back, don't let them control you, because we really have to be clear. If indeed terrible things start happening, we have to be very clear. And we have to have a very, very strong center. If our center is not strong, we won't be able to know what to do. We won't be able to help anybody. If your center is not strong, then, your survival, the survival of the person next to you, maybe you're not threatened, but your neighbor is threatened, you won't know how to help. And I have a very personal story about that. I had a dear friend in college who had literally a nervous breakdown. She suddenly decided she and her boyfriend were going to, run away. It's a long story, but they were going to run away. And it was clearly that this was not, that something terrible would happen. And what terrible thing that happened is she completely fell apart, had to be institutionalized for a couple of years. And she came to my dorm room and said to me, I don't know what to do. We're going to do this thing. And I knew this was the wrong thing to do. But I was totally stoned on a strong narcotic because I had really bad period cramps. And so a part of me knew, don't do this, but I couldn't respond because I had no center. I was completely stoned, And so later it occurred to me, we had a good friend whose parents owned a camp, a summer camp, and they could have gone there and taken refuge, and our friend's parents could have, negotiated with her parents. I mean, there was actually a decent plan that could have happened, but I didn't have the center to be able to do it. I couldn't come up with it. So it's really important. We have to really have our hearts open, and we have to have a strong center, and we have to have a very clear mind. And we have to be willing to put ourselves out there when the time comes to put yourself out there. That's extremely important. And yeah, the Proud Boys, you can't deal with the Proud Boys. You can't deal with those people. You can't deal with the, incredibly transphobic people, the incredibly racist people, the incredibly, you can't deal with those people. But most people are not like that. And if we recognize that, and if everyone can recognize their common humanity, then there's hope. Then maybe things will be okay. So the other thing is, my brother has been very active politically for a long time, and he's been looking into a lot of issues of resistance and sort of when tyranny happens, hasn't happened yet, maybe it won't, but maybe it will, that the most important thing is to have group solidarity in the sense, like labor unions, in the sense of organizations that people can come together. And they may not, in really terrible dictatorships, they can't be out in the open, but that working with other people, being with other people is extremely important. So I hope that that all the catastrophes that people are imagining, I hope that those don't happen. It'd be wonderful if they don't happen. Or that if they do happen, they start happening, and then everybody goes, oops, we didn't want to do that. Which would be extremely terrible for the people they happen to, but then for everybody else, okay, good. And then we have to help the people who were hurt. But yeah, it's interesting times. And my basic thought is, why should we be more immune than anyone else in the world? So much suffering in this world, ocean of suffering. Zen was founded at a time of terrible, terrible suffering. It was a different kind of suffering, but it was suffering. It was bandits and warlords and invasions and massacres and famine and locusts. Yeah, they even had locusts. And deforestation, floods, you name it, the late Tang had it. And that's where Zen comes from. So we are not exempt, and our job really is to help each other. So good luck to everybody. And are there any questions? I've been giving that monologue in so many places, but it's needed. Are there any questions? Yes?
How was Zen founded?
How was Zen founded? Okay, you always have such wonderful questions. You always get at the fundamentals there. How was Zen founded? So Buddhism started in what is now ancient India, North India, supposedly by a guy named Gautama Shakyamuni. And it made its way down the Indian continent, and it also made its way into China. And from China, or maybe it was from India, but it also made its way into Tibet and Mongolia. So it made its way into China, and it was mostly like sutras, that kind of thing, very monastic, lots of support by the emperor and nobility and things like that. And there's a famous, so then supposedly this Indian monk named Bodhidharma comes to China, and he's sort of the founder of Zen. Except there's also this tradition that Buddha gave Zen transmission to Mahakashapa, who gave to blah, 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 going down to Bodhidharma. And so there's sort of this inner kind of legend that somehow Zen was there from the beginning, but no serious scholar believes that. So supposedly this Indian monk named Bodhidharma comes to China and discovers that Buddhism is very well developed there. Lots of monks, lots of sutra study, lots of chanting and bowing and stuff like that, and lay people are supporting the temples and everything. So he has an interview with the emperor. And the emperor knows this is a very big monk, a very important guy, this guy from India. And so the emperor says to him, this is Emperor Wu, which sounds like a rock and roll song, Emperor Wu. But anyway, Emperor Wu from the 70s, right? Rock and roll from the 70s. Steely Dan, right. So Emperor Wu says to Bodhidharma, I have built many, many temples. I have sponsored many monks, probably didn't mention nuns, but they were there. I have, paid for the translation and transcription of many, many sutras. How much merit have I attained? This is the idea. You practice so that you attain merit so you get a better life in the next life. So how much merit have I attained? And Bodhidharma says, no merit. And the emperor is like, what? And he says, well, what is holy? And Bodhidharma says, vast emptiness, no holiness. And now the emperor's really pissed off. He says to him, who are you? And Bodhidharma says, don't know, and walks out. And then when the emperor recovers, he says to his general, go after that guy, bring him back, kill him or something. No, that is the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara come to teach us. You blew it, leave him alone. Then he goes up to the monastery where Shaolin Monastery, where Kung Fu is founded, right? He goes, or whatever it is. Anyway, he goes up to Shaolin Monastery, and he's just disgusted with the Chinese. And so he sits and faces, little cave next to the monastery, he sits and faces the wall for 9 years in spite. And he even cuts off his eyelashes so that he'll never sleep. So he can practice. I mean, if you believe this, guys, there's a bridge across the Kansas River, I'll sell you, but anyway, that's the story. So he's sitting there in spite, really pissed off at these Chinese monks. the whole nation of China is really pissed off, but somehow he stays there. And anyway, so this monk comes and stands outside his door, in the snow, like, please teach me. They must have been feeding him, so, he's not that pissed off, but, he's standing there outside in the snow, please teach me, and Bodhidharma does not turn around. He doesn't pay any attention to this guy. So the monk cuts off his arm and holds it and says, my mind is suffering, please calm my mind is in distress, please calm my mind. And that catches Bodhidharma's attention. So he says, bring me your mind and I will calm it for you. And the monk says, I cannot find my mind. And Bodhidharma says, well, then now it is calm, isn't it? And so that becomes his first disciple. He later gave transmission to him. Huike. Actually, other stories, Bodhidharma had 4 major disciples, one of whom was a woman. But the big one that comes down in the lineage is Huike. So that's sort of supposedly how Zen started. Zen differentiated itself from the rest of the Mahayana a couple of centuries later when Baizhang, who's very important in the history of Zen. So first of all, Zen is a Japanese word for the Chinese word Chan. The Korean word is Sun. And the Chinese word Chan is the Chinese word for the Sanskrit word jhana. And jhana means meditation. So Zen is the meditation school, which means that the emphasis in Zen is on meditation. So prostrations are meditation, chanting is meditation, meditation is meditation. So walking is meditation. So instead of, I want a better life in my next lifetime, instead of that kind of motivation, the motivation is wake up. Wake up. And later it becomes wake up, help this world. So that sort of differentiated. So there were all these stories about, for example, Doksan was a great sutra master. And this is several centuries after Bodhidharma, and he heard about, these monks in the south who just sit there and face the wall, and they don't read sutras, and he's going to teach them the lesson, So he walks, thousands of miles, because they didn't have airplanes or trains or cars or anything, bicycles. So he walked like thousands of miles down south. And finally he comes, he's really hungry, it's lunchtime, he comes to this tea house, and there's a tea house lady. There were always tea house ladies in these stories. This tea house lady who says, oh, you're a great monk, what can I do for you? I would like some lunch. Oh, wonderful, I see you're a great sutra monk. So, Diamond Sutra monk, so let me ask you a question, and if you answer this question, your lunch is free. Otherwise, no lunch. He's really pissed. I am a great Diamond Sutra master, how can you talk to me like this, And she's, okay, so, I can answer anything, okay. So Diamond Sutra says, past mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped. With what mind will you eat your lunch? Well, the Diamond Sutra says nothing about that. The Diamond Sutra is very abstract. So he's like, And then he finally says, who's your teacher? He said, up that mountain, you'll find my teacher, So he goes up the mountain and he becomes a Zen master, okay? So there's this opposition between sutra schools and Zen, which is kind of silly, but anyway, that's in the history, there's a lot of that. And then Baizhang, who I think came before Doksan. Baizhang was very important because he's the one who said a day without work is a day without eating. And so he had the Zen monks and the Zen nuns in the women's temples, he convinced people that they needed to do their own farming, grow their own food, fix their own monasteries, everything like that. That made Chan somewhat independent of the sort of establishment. So when China started falling apart, well, the Chinese government, I mean, China didn't fall apart. The government, when the government started falling apart, 200 years of really bad stuff in the Tang, the Chan monasteries and women's temples, the men's and women's temples, survived much better because they weren't, all the other monks and nuns would go around begging. That's all they did. They had to ask people for things. They didn't do it themselves. So they came out fairly strong out of the Tang dynasty. And so Chan became a very important school. Then it went into Korea, where its son went into, I think from Korea to Japan, but mostly the Japanese looked towards China, where it became Zen. So that's a very brief, potted history of Zen. Yeah. So thank you for your question. And I left a lot out. A lot out. Yeah. And we are out of time. So thank you, everybody.